mentioned the Gen Z thing, and I know that's something I read one of your pieces, talking about sort of talent, where it's coming from, a little bit about how COVID is affecting this. How we, meaning that generation, viewing secondary learning. What product are they buying? Are they willing to go into debt for this or not? How are they going to end up in this space? And how are people specifically in the infrastructure business going to attract younger talent? Because they certainly have so much to offer, being, as you had said, digitally native and thinking about the future of the world. What are your thoughts on this? Because I know you have a bunch of them.
So I work with an organization called iMasons, Infrastructure Masons, and it was founded by some really brilliant folks. Actually, it was one of the original founders was Rob Roy, the CEO of Switch. Currently headed up by Dean Nelson, former head of Uber Compute, and right now really a leader in the data center and digital communication space. So as a part of iMasons, I'm on their advisory council as well as their chairperson for the Millennial and the Gen Z resource group. So my role there is to be able to talk to Gen Zs, talk to millennials, understand what's going on, and really try to see sort of what's happening in their world right now. And this entire concept of COVID and what's been happening out there has really shaken the core value system of Gen Zs. Already, Gen Z account for about 61 million people in the United States. That's actually a number that's greater than Generation X and 2/3 the size of baby boomers.
That's insane.
So it's insane, right? So you better be ready for this generation to become, or at least you're hoping for, become the first real balance between digital and interpersonal communications. And there were several studies that I did, aside from actually having conversations with these folks. Robert Half indicated the preferred environment was actually for Gen Zs, was actually to collaborate in small groups in office settings. Are you ready for this part? You know what their least preferred method of communication was? It's insane. Zoom. like doing this, as strange as it might sound, Gen Z would much rather talk to you in person than over a device. 74% said that they would prefer to communicate face-to-face with colleagues. How is this affecting it? It really is throwing a lot of plans out the window. A lot of these young people are looking at different methods and means to go to school and get secondary education. Right now, many of my millennial friends are questioning whether their large student debt was worth it. It was 44% of recent college grads are employed in jobs they didn't even get a degree in. And 1 in 8 recent grads, my peers, are still unemployed. So they're going and looking at things like Uncollege, Mission U, Khan Academy, specific certifications from GCP, AWS, Azure, your specific vendors. And I think that's wonderful, right? And I think what's really important is that anybody listening to this, my big piece of advice to you is you need to understand the value system of Gen Z. And I hope you're ready for this next part, Gen Alpha. That's my kid, Justin. That's your kid.
I know you mentioned that earlier, and I said Gen Alpha. Oh my God.
That name might change. Obviously, we might look at that generation a little bit differently. But it is an entirely different kind of value system that the Gen Z does have. So attracting them might look a little bit differently. Remember, age?
I don't want to interrupt. What age is Gen Z? I literally don't know. What age is Gen Z?
Gen Z is you're 20 years old right now.
Okay.
Ish. So I believe it's I think it's 2000.
Okay.
2000 through today-ish, and then anything sort of before that would be Gen Alpha. But again, please don't quote me on that name. It's going to change. If right now somebody's Googling it, it could be a million different things. So Gen Zs, they prefer, like I said, getting a different way of getting education in a lot of situations. But what's interesting is that they do value success, the ability to grow and succeed, both professionally and academically. So certifications, growth career-wise, and so on. So for a lot of organizations that are trying to recruit the next talent, how do I recruit and retain them? Focus on actually diversity and inclusion programs. That's huge. And don't just have it on paper, actually exercise that stuff. That's really, really important. Have conversations with your young people, actually get them on board. Another big thing that I really recommend, and I can't believe this was mentioned to me multiple times, the first interaction that a lot of Gen Zs have is through an HR portal. Right. And if this Gen Z has to go on your HR portal, type in some information, click next, type in more information, click next, and then upload a resume, that already has the information that he just typed in, just to click next to type in more information that they were just putting in the resume, they're going to bail. Super talented engineer friend of mine. He was 21 years old. Actually, he was on the cusp of millennial and Gen Z. Brilliant dude. Didn't go to college. Million certs. So much actual real life experience. The guy knows coding and development like the back of his hand. Wanted to go work for a fairly sized organization, pretty big. And this is exactly what he ran up into. An HR onboarding process without a single human being talking to them was just horrendous. He literally called me, he's like, Bill, thanks for recommending this company. I'm not going to work for them, because if those systems that I just applied for are as legacy as their internal stuff, why would I go work there? Forget it. I'm going to go to a startup that's much more agile. And I was like, oh my God, I need to call some executives and tell them to fix their stuff, because it's a little bit scary.
But without that market pressure, then you just sit.
You do sit and you're complacent, and it gets really, really scary, because then you start to see your competition pass you by.
Yeah. Happens all the time.
And this is for me too, right? My millennial counterparts listening to this, as leaders in the industry, if you're managing people right now, please know that Gen Zs are different than you and I. They're different than millennials. They don't job hop. They do want stability. I mean, this is a generation that lived through 9/11. This is a generation that lived through the Great Recession. So they're seeing obviously, they're seeing tumultuous times that they want some level of stability. So unlike maybe my generation, who did want to get a new career every 2 or 3 years, or a new job or a new role, Gen Z is really, really different. My biggest piece of advice is take a deep breath, learn from them, see what their value system is and how they can be productive and successful. And also know that this whole COVID thing, this pandemic, is really fundamentally impacting their psyche, how excited they are, and just what some of the things that they can do in the world are right now. I mean, all the trips, all the internships, all the things being done abroad, just out the window right now.
And so I want to dive just a little bit deeper. So most of the people that I speak to are on the infrastructure side of this enormous economy, the technical economy, which is, somewhere between, depending upon how you look at it, it's, $2 to $4 trillion. Let's call it 1 to 3 to be conservative. On the infrastructure side alone, it's certainly over $1 trillion.
Yeah. Yep.
How does the infrastructure side tell its story in a way that it can attract the best talent? So this brilliant 21-year-old, when competing with the likes of consumer-facing technologies, whether it be social media, whether it be, some other perceived to be sexier solution.
I ask people if folks know what Google does, and they say, search engine, all that stuff. I'm like, did you know they're a data center company?
This is great.
And people are like, what? I'm like, they're a data center company, man.
I say this all the time.
Yeah, but they're not going to tell you they're a data center company. They're just going to ask you to go search on Google, right? And the same thing with Facebook, AWS, all these organizations, they have data centers. But that's not cool. That's not, like you said, this really fun way of looking at our environment, right? Whereas you've got consumer ecosystems that might be a little bit more fun to go after. I wrote an article. If you're watching this, you can Google it right now. It's called "Data Centers Are More Than Blinking Lights and Big Buildings." Okay. And this was a STEAM approach, right? Science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. I added the arts in there. Where I talked about, ask a young person what happens when they stream Netflix or listen to Pandora, and they'll simply say it runs in the cloud. You go a little bit deeper, like, well, what really is that? And they're going to run in, maybe they'll say it's a computer somewhere sitting, they'll give you a general answer. One thing I usually ask for is they don't understand that there's a footprint to everything that they do. A single Google search can power a 100-watt light bulb for 11 seconds. Let that sit. And
yeah.
So when I'm streaming Pandora or Netflix in the background and it asks, hey, dude, are you still watching? There's a reason for that, right? It's because you're consuming energy and electricity. So a 100-watt light bulb can be powered for 11 seconds with one Google search that you do. How many Google searches did you do today, right? So there's a footprint. And because there's an actual footprint, we have to dive into that. So the STEAM of big buildings and blinking lights, right? So when you talk about how our environment, forget the word infrastructure, our environment, what we do in this world is fundamentally different. So science, for example, you don't need to know a thing about data centers, but if you know physics, if you know how fluid dynamics works,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be able to figure out things like airflow. And that's really,
Mm-hmm.
really important for us. We need to know how that stuff works. How can you create a digital clone of an existing data center or any facility using 3D simulations to analyze cooling and efficiency? Dude, that is so cool. Nothing to do with data centers, nothing to do with that. That's specifically science. And then if you look at the technology acronym, right, way more than blinking lights. At my organization, Switch,
Mm-hmm.
here's my logo. Super cool company. Go check it out, switch.com.
Mm-hmm.
We build everything from robotics, and this is all in press releases, to unmanned aerial management systems, partnering with FAA to do this kind of stuff, partnering with organizations like First Robotics to build competitions for kids to do things like robots and stuff, building massively interesting edge data centers throughout the entire world. A lot of fascinating things that go way beyond a building with blinking lights and everything else is in there. And like engineering, for example, you could be working on a quantum computer, and that's way different than working with traditional blinking lights. I mean, do you know how cold you have to keep an environment for a quantum computer? 0.015 Kelvin.
Yeah.
And just to give you an idea, 0 Kelvin is negative 273 Celsius. And that's Antarctica, the coldest it gets is negative 128. So can you imagine how cold you have to keep a quantum machine? Nothing to do with data centers, but all of a sudden you're working with these really cool technologies. Art, do you have any idea how creative you have to be to work in our industry to create some of this stuff? Google the supercomputer in Barcelona. It's called the Barcelona Supercomputing Center, and it is gorgeous. It is gorgeous. It's a data center that's inside of like a cathedral from like the umpteenth century, and it looks absolutely amazing. Like 13.7 teraflops of processing power, one of the most powerful computers in the world, beautifully designed and artistic. I mean, obviously Switch has these amazingly gorgeous functional designs as well that we have in there too. Mathematics is another one. That's that last part of the steam, right? I use my statistics training all the time still. You don't have to know anything about data centers. I tell people that the career in technology and working with these large digital foundations begins before any ground is broken, before anything is put up, before anything even goes up, to understand deeply the things that you're going to be supporting. I mean, how cool is it that, I can walk over and point to the servers where, some of the Marvel movies were rendered, or I can talk to you about where, all of your files are on a specific kind of an island where all this data is being stored, or where some of the services that you're working on. Now, I want to talk about one last thing. I know this is a really long-winded answer, and if you're still with me, good job.